Thank you for gathering on my account. I hope it wasn't in vain. I will say, if you feel like I'm rambling on, you have a great way to get out. I was a teacher and sitting in a teacher-parent conference, and the parent was getting very unruly. And one of the teachers who was just didn't have a filter said, "Don't you have to get to work?" So if you heard the announcement, "Hey, hurry up, sit down so Keith can talk because he's got to catch a plane," you might want to raise your hand and say, "Don't you have a plane to catch?" So feel free. I did take some notes this morning, and I wanted to comment on those a little bit. First of all, I'm sort of the opposite in many ways of our speaker earlier, whereas he has, if you look at the map, he's all over it. If you look at the map of the place I live, first of all, there's been about 5 of them, and you have to narrow it down to the state of Colorado, to zoom into the state of Colorado so that my little bubbles aren't just blurred together in one mass. And then to get the other 4, you have to zoom into Colorado Springs. So he was all over the place. I almost went no place. In fact, I live in the house I grew up in. So very different in that way, kind of the opposite. But we are kind of complementary in some ways. Like I'm tall, and he's dark and handsome. Did you hear the rest of that? I'm tall, and you're dark and handsome. I was complimenting you. Did she say you're tall? Anyway, I have to be a little careful because he's going to preach in our church at the end of the month, and I don't want to hear about it. Anyway, there's some other things I had to say about Colorado and Iowa and some of the contrasts, and they mostly were in favor of Colorado. I have this isn't exactly a slideshow. We're going to kind of go through it. I am like not nearly as talented either, besides not being as dark or pretty. If I tried to compete, it would look too contrasty. So I made mine nice and simple so we know that I can't do that. But I'd like to jump into a line of questioning. I'm not trying to entrap you. Okay, I am not trying to entrap you. I'm not trying to sell you. The line of questioning sounds like I'm going to get at selling you something. And I'm not. I do have something to sell you. But I'm not trying to sell it to you. Just run with that. So first of all, I wonder who in the room has a sense of a call from God to share the gospel with your neighbor or people you know. Just stand up. If you feel like God is calling you, and be honest, don't just stand up if your feeling is, no, I have the gospel and I'm hanging on to it because I'm not sure how much of there is. Okay, so that's typical. In a room like this, and some of you, you can stand up. Somebody was suppressing that. Sure, we all. Now, another thought I had was, but I'm not going to do this. I was going to say, and now raise your hand if you've acted on that call. It is an important question, but you don't have to raise your hand. I'll tell you, I haven't always been, and I struggle with responding to that call. But as believers, we pretty much all have that call. Okay, let's start over. Sit down. This is great. Let's just stand up just for the fun of it so I can see how powerful I am. Okay, sit down. Perfect. All right. So, second question. And now you're going to see where I'm trying to get you, maybe. But I'm not trying to get you. I am trying to sell you something, but it won't cost you anything. Which of you, and trust me, it's okay if you don't. Please believe me. It's okay if you don't. But who here has a sense of a call to take the gospel out to the nations, out of this nation, out to the nations, especially to people in the world who really have very little or no access to the gospel? How many people would stand up and say, yeah, I have that call? I believe it. This is the second time this person's told me that. So this is believable. It's credible. And there's several of you who have talked to me suggesting it. Okay, so don't sit down yet. No, go ahead and sit down. I would like somebody who didn't stand up to stand up, and I'm happy to hear it. Again, I'm not going to trap you. I'm not going to shame you, nothing. But if you didn't stand up, having sensed a call to go out to the nations, would somebody tell me why you have a call to not go, to stay?
There's so much work to be done here.
Okay, that is a good reason. There is so much work to be done here. Yep. Right. Those are both good reasons, and I applaud them. And I think people are called to stay where they are and share the gospel. I will also emphasize that if you were called to stay and share the gospel, I hope you're sharing the gospel, right? If you've sort of answered the call, but you haven't shown up for duty, pray about that. So RP Global Missions believes all of those. RP Global Missions hopes and prays that you are sharing the gospel where you are. And RP Global Missions prays that there will be people going out to places where the gospel is accessible. And RP Global Missions has been given a commission from the RPCNA to primarily take the gospel and plant churches, and that's one and the same thing. We plant churches, and that's who takes the gospel, is the church. It's people, obviously. And there are some opportunities to take it some places where the gospel has been forgotten, right? Australia, that's a place where the gospel is, people can remember that old idea, but it's not very popular to hold it. So my appeal to you today, just to give it to you right out in front, is you may not be called to go to the ends of the world where the gospel is inaccessible. Most people aren't. In fact, we need most people to stay here, because it takes a lot of people to support each person that goes. So most of you should plan to stay. But I would like to appeal to you today to be involved in sending those people who stood up. You don't have to stand up again. Think about those people who you just saw and say, ooh, I would like to be involved while I stay, or while I go to France, or while I go to Australia. I would like to be involved in helping send some of those people. Okay, so that's my premise. That's what I'm going to try to sell you on. And we have a course, by the way. We have a course I'll tell you about shortly. And this is an assignment. Read this article, 14 Reasons for Missions. And the context of the article is not the broad definition of missions, but the more narrow definition of taking the gospel to the nations where it really hasn't gotten there yet. I'm going to give you an analogy real quick of a situation. You can draw the analogy as I go along. Actually, I was going to tell the story, but I decided I would try to make fun of Pastor Schneider first. I think I made fun of me, didn't I? I get that mixed up. Okay, so I have a niece whose husband died, and her house, the outside of the house, was a bit of a wreck. The landscaping was a wreck. And so somehow when she died, there was a whole swelling of people who wanted to help her out. And so we had weeks after week after week, we re-landscaped her yard. But we also painted her house. And I think probably 50 people showed up in a day and painted, scraped, caulked, and painted her house in a day. It was a big house. And that paint job lasted about 10 years. It was a good paint job. And the way that worked was there were people all the way around the house. It was kind of a COVID job. People about every 6 feet or so. Scraping, painting, not caulking last. Scraping, caulking, painting. And instantly the house was painted. But imagine, and then you'll see where I'm going when you see some statistics. Imagine if all 50 people showed up at the south side of the house. Maybe a few people kind of around the corner. All 50 people showed up there, and they all worked on their little spot. The house wouldn't have gotten painted, right? We would have all been stuck around there, kind of want to hang out together. We needed to have people spread out. Well, that's the situation in the world. And it's not that far off in terms of the ratio of numbers. So let me give you some reasons to think about going or sending people to go. And that's our appeal, is that you either go or send. Look, God has promised to bless all the nations. And we need to take that blessing to all the nations, right? Jesus purchased people from every tribe and nation. There are elect in those places. And we're called to go take the gospel to them. I'm going to focus on 3 and 4 here in a minute. And don't forget to tell me I have to catch a plane if I'm going too long. It's logically necessary for hearing the gospel message. People need to go, right? There's a verse in there somewhere because I know Pastor Schneider is going to tell me to pull it out of my Bible matrix. There is a passage that says if nobody goes, they can't hear it. Okay, the example of the church was to go out. This is really interesting. This is thought-provoking. You can't even see it. The descriptive future is prescriptive for today. Jesus, okay, let me back up a second. If somebody asks you, when will Jesus return? I don't know. We don't know. But we do know something about the condition of his return, because when he returns, it's game over. And by that time, there will be people from every tongue, tribe, and nation who have come to faith. We know that because we get a picture of heaven in Revelation 7:9. And heaven is full of people from every tribe and nation. So in missions teaching, there is a motivation, which is, let's get out there and take the gospel to every tribe and nation to hasten the return of our Lord. Let's get it done. If you have siblings, or if you don't have siblings, but if you do, you know the scenario where the room is a mess and there's cookies to be eaten. And mom says, hey, clean the room, get the room cleaned up, and everybody messes around. But then when she says, the room is not going to be clean until the cookies are eaten. The cookies will not be served until the room is clean, and somebody's just dragging their feet. Somebody's going to run in there and go, oh, I'll do it, so we can all have some cookies. So it's the same kind of logic. We can hasten the return of our Lord. That's something to think about. And then he says, it's tricky, so don't spend too much time thinking about it. We're going to be held accountable, because to whom much is given, much is required. Because the church is the means. We need to plant churches around among every tribe and nation. History awaits the fulfillment of the promise. Because the glory of the Lord is yet to be known, That's a big deal. I'm not talking about it today because I have to catch a plane. And this is a very big deal. It's the command of Jesus to take the gospel to all the ends of the earth. So that is a call that we all have, and how we're going to answer it is something else. Let me go back to these two things. You can't read them, but I know that Pastor Schneider put something up that you couldn't read. I was taking notes and I shrunk my font. 6.5 billion people on the planet. Of the 6.5 people, there's more than that now, aren't there? But they're getting less because everybody's not having babies anymore, or they're killing them. 6.5 billion people on the planet. 4 billion are without a saving relationship with Christ. 2.4 billion, about a third. So think of my picture of the house. About a third of the house who are lost have no or very little means to hear the gospel of Christ. So a third of the earth has no access to it, which isn't to say you shouldn't take the gospel to your neighbor, and it's not to say your family, who God has prepared very specially, should not be taking the gospel to France. You should go where God calls you. But I am going to challenge you to be involved in taking the gospel to that 2.4 billion. That's a lot of the earth, right? Think of my niece's house, and if everybody is stuck on one end and there's nobody on the other end, somebody probably should go around to the other end, right? Here's the flip side of that statistic. Only 1 in every 20,000 believers will ever take the gospel to those who are out of reach of the gospel. 1 out of 20,000 believers. 2.5% of all the 430,000 missionaries are working. 2.5%, this 1040 window, I won't tell you what, that's this group who don't have the access to the gospel. It's where most of those people are. But 2.5% of all of the missionaries are working on a third of the earth. So that's what I want to talk to you a little bit. That's the motivation I want to bring to you. I want to bring those statistics to you, and I want to encourage you. What do I want to encourage you to do? Oh, I was going to have you sit down and stand up again. I'm going to save some time. You can raise your hand. It'll be easier. No, I won't. My question was going to be, answer this in the silence of your heart. Close your eyes so you can't see what anybody else is thinking. And who is not convinced at this point? Lucky for you, I have to catch an airport or I keep going because I am going to keep my eyes open and I'm going to see what you're thinking. Who is still not convinced that you are called to go either help or go yourself? Just think about that. Either help or go yourself. And I want to say this. I already said the ratio is that most of you should stay. Most of you should stay because we need a lot of people to stay. But I'm glad we have probably, don't you think, the percentage of people who stood up in this crowd to say, I feel called in some way, someday, to take the gospel to these people who have never heard it. We're doing pretty well. And the rest of you, think about how can you be involved. So that's where my pitch comes. Most of you are not going to become involved in my program. About 1% or so, maybe more than that. And that's fine. My purpose is to gather Christians together to equip them to be involved. My purpose of my program is not to have lots of trips or lots of people. However, RP Global Mission's strategy to help equip people to be involved in the ways I've just talked about has several layers. And I don't have them on the slide. I don't have an article. I'm just going to read them off my notes. I had to write it down so I wouldn't lie. I have 3 ways that you can get involved in taking the gospel. The first is the simplest, And my program, by and large, if you go on one of my trips, the trips that I spend my time coordinating, if you go on an RP Global Missions trip, you need to be 18 or above, with one exception. I'll bring that up. So oftentimes I speak to a group that's significantly high school, and it's like, oh, okay, well, sorry we listened to you. Don't you have a plane to catch? But we do have a course. It's a fairly easy course to take. It's 8 weeks, an hour on a Saturday, and it's about 2 hours of assignments. And that adds up. But it's 8 weeks in a row, about 2 hours a week of reading and answering questions, and then on a Saturday morning you get together with a group of people to discuss what you've been reading and thinking about. That's the simplest way. It's called RPGM Explore. And the application is simple. You send a note to info@rpmissions.org. And I am so sorry I have nothing to hand to you. But somebody in here is going to remember info@rpmissions.org. And when you later on go, ooh, I want to sign up for that course, you're going, hey, does anybody remember that email address? And several people, oh, yeah, it was info@rpmissions.org. Right? I only have to say it 4 more times and you'll remember it, but I have a plane to catch. So you'll just have to go with 3. Okay, 4, info@rpmissions.org. I have another way for you to get involved, even if you're 16, as young as 16, because we do have a trip. And all of our trips, by the way, come with this course. But we have a trip that is to Pittsburgh. Not quite as far away as France. For some people, sort of emotionally, it's as far away. Like if you live in Colorado, it is. If you live in Iowa, I don't know, you probably don't want to go to Pittsburgh either because I hear it's the most beautiful state in the union. Colorado would be the most beautiful state in the union, except about half of Colorado is really ugly. Right? Yeah, there's some beautiful spots. So it's only half nice, not like Iowa that's nice from corner to corner. Although, you know what I find out when I come to Iowa? No, I've been about 3 places in Iowa. No matter where I go in Iowa, I go, I think I've been here before. It is beautiful. And maybe you can get too much of a good thing, I don't know. Anyway, we are desperately in need of people participating in a trip we have in Pittsburgh. If you think you might have some interest in spending a month this summer in Pittsburgh, having a wonderful experience, gaining the skills. Let's suppose you said, I'm called to take the gospel to my neighbors, but I don't know where to begin. You can spend a month in Pittsburgh ministering to the neighbors of Covenant Fellowship RP Church, and you will come home and you will know how and you will have experience sharing the gospel with your neighbors. So I would invite you to participate in that trip. And then we have a variety of other trips that are international trips. And you can take one of those trips. You can take our course. All of those, the focus of them is to help you sort out whether either you're called to take the gospel out to the nations or to just help you explore the numerous ways that you can get involved in sending other people. I have a plane to catch.